Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we have a very special guest joining us, Senator Pat Bates. Pat, how's it going? Thanks for joining the program.
Everything's good, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I love talking to you and your members, especially because, your sense of, I guess, your history up here, being here in the, late 90s, early 2000s to kind of showing up to Sacramento now, kind of, having been, served in the Senate and the Assembly in both these eras, kind of what are some of the changes you've seen in Sacramento and the process?
During my time in the Assembly, we actually had to have a 2/3 vote on the budget to pass it. And at that time, Republicans did hold that little margin. So there was a lot more negotiations. I do believe that our leaders, the minority and the majority, and it was the big five, if I remember correctly, that would go into the governor's office and hammer out the desires of each of the parties. And probably a lot more bipartisan legislation came through. Don't make me go back that far in my memory and try to remember specifically those particular things. But I didn't feel it was as confrontational as it has become in the last couple of years. So that's a difference. But on a personal level, to folks on the other side, my colleagues, Democrat and Republican, there's still the camaraderie that we are all here to serve the people and our districts. While we have a majority of Republicans in my district, I have very strong connections with my district as a whole. And I don't look at the R and the D. I look at the particular policy and whether it reflects what I believe my district is about. And as their representative, they don't have a voice. They have one, mine, that I try to be very mindful that it is about the quality of life that I am protecting and enhancing as their representative.
Yeah, I think we all remember those 2/3 vote budgets and those late nights, or lack of budgets. I remember, when a budget and the end of session would coincide. And, that kind of takes us back to the energy crisis in 2003, the recall. Exactly. Kind of what are some of your memories of serving during that first recall and that kind of chaotic, crazy time?
It was very chaotic. That you mentioned the energy crisis, that was very personal in my life because my mom had a very small pension and it was very hot. She lived in Escondido and it took one pension check 1 month to pay for her energy that month. And that's when we saw that, what we called it the tsunami with the deregulation really hitting our districts and in my case, individually, a family member. So those were pretty strident times in terms of how to resolve that. I remember that on the recall. I do remember my first meeting with Governor Schwarzenegger when he won the election, and I was in the leadership at that time and sitting around the long conference table in the Horseshoe was kind of a new experience for me. And seeing Governor Schwarzenegger, Arnold, right, the Terminator in there. And he was very open, seeking, how to navigate all of the issues that were before him. So I also remember Governor Wilson, when I first was elected to the Assembly, he called the new Assembly members in, I being one of them. And he reminded us, and I thought this was kind of the character of the man. He said, it isn't whose name is on a piece of legislation. It's what it's going to do for the people you represent and how you will protect them as a whole. And so be sure you get in the game, engage, and you can make good things happen with things that start out not so good, shall we say, but you can make it happen and then you can build respect, integrity and camaraderie, which is what we're supposed to be doing here. So it was very meaningful. And I felt that along the way, the recall issue, that was over the vehicle license fee, correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That one, we just couldn't get on the same page altogether. And those were tough times. And I do remember Governor Davis, this kind of was a ripple through the Assembly when he told the legislative Democrats that their job was to basically initiate his vision. And it wasn't about their vision that he was signing on to. I don't know if you remember that, but
Right.
that was a little bit of a dust up, and probably maybe not so good for Governor Davis at that time, because I think he might have lost some of the support that perhaps Governor Newsom has from his colleagues as he's facing a recall himself.
Turning to now, and now here we are, what was this, almost, 15 years later, almost 20 years later, and here we are talking about another recall and another chaotic, crazy time. What similarities are you seeing to kind of the last recall, and kind of what kind of different things are you seeing as well?
I think the similarities is that you have some major issues that are really impacting our folks in our districts in the state of California. What Governor Davis had were two very significant ones: energy, and then the cost with the vehicle license fee was kind of the straw in the camel's back, so to speak. And that's what Governor Schwarzenegger really jumped on, if you remember, as he took his campaign to the streets, so to speak. But Governor Newsom has many, many issues, probably the lockdown, and whether we were using science. And that still remains a big question on picking June 15th as the date we're going to open. These are things that clearly are questioned and continue, I think, the debate on whether this whole thing was based on science or it was politically motivated. I think the problem is that maybe too cookie cutter. And we kept asking for that, certainly from my county. And they worked very well with Dr. Ghali, by the way, and with the governor's office, and following the directions once those got a little clearer through the tier system, but still very, very challenging. And so he has that. He has the Employment Development Department, EDD, employment. It's horrific. It's still horrific. In my office alone in San Diego, we have just 200 cases in one office that my staff spends most of the day and the week trying to resolve. So that's a huge issue that's driving some of this. So it is very nonpartisan, let's say, bipartisan, because of the people out there suffering. They've come through the pandemic. There have been a lot of opportunities for additional income through the federal grants coming to the state and some of the things that we've done, but it still is not solved, and it's been going on. Some of these cases are 6 and 8 months old, so that's a biggie. So there's just a myriad of things that are dysfunctional at the moment compared to 2003, when it was really targeted to coming through that energy crisis, and then on top of that, the vehicle license fee. So maybe simpler, and maybe, if you want to look back on that, is that because we had to have a 2/3 vote on a budget, so a lot of the things that were decided in those budgets had more compromise in them than we have now.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we have a May revise coming up here in a few weeks. Can you talk to us a little bit about kind of some of your budget priorities and kind of what you're looking for in this budget coming out?
I think the ones that have been big on my list have been addressed, and we start with the Keep California Working Act, and that was SB, do I have the numbers right, SB 74, but it was folded into the budget under, I think, Senator Caballero and Senator Min, I believe, were the ones that introduced. Senator Moore just introduced it, but it was combined with those other individuals, and it's $2 billion, if I remember correctly, that are grants available for business and nonprofits to help them through the pandemic setbacks they've had with their businesses. The other one we just passed the other Monday, which is AB 80, and it is clearly going to help significantly with those businesses that receive PPP income and are now not going to receive. They're receiving, the ability to have a total deduction of taxes for business expenses on those funds that they receive. Again, that was an act coming forward from a Senate, Andreas Borges, and it was a Republican idea. And I think what's neat about the whole thing, both sides, Republican, Democrats, our leaders, and budget chairs all work together to make that a great compromise. Now, that to me reflects what used to go on in 2000 when I was in the Assembly, because you had the big five that worked together on a lot of those budget priorities, and you couldn't get the 2/3 vote, right, without, giving everybody didn't get everything they wanted, but most people got a little bit or a little bit more than they expected to get. And I think that this particular, those two bills actually, I think, demonstrate that. In terms of another priority was getting our schools opened, and, that's been a huge controversy. And I think that has also fueled some of the recall fervor. The fact that the governor came through that with a $6.6 billion grant to schools that agreed to go back to in-person instruction. The problem with the bill is specifically you only had to open one day and then back to your hybrid or back to online, and that I think kind of dulled what I'd consider to be probably would have been a better victory, where schools were required to move forward, because the data on that, and clearly the science on that, is there. It's coming from all over the country. So those were certainly high priorities. And I go back to the Employment Development Department. That is a huge priority. It has to get fixed. When you have the con men and the schemers that were able to do the kind of fraud in the billions of dollars of grants that they received, or those debit cards they received. And I have people who, in fact, just the other day, one of our constituents had their car repossessed, been waiting for their unemployment check for 6 months, and has we've actually gone several times to find out the status, no response on that one. So that's just one in one office out of 120 legislators. And I know much of our staff on both sides of the House are very engaged in all of this. So that has to be fixed yesterday. And I think that would bring us a long way to a little more cooperation and bipartisanship if we really get to the bottom of what is the problem. Added more staff, we have a strike team, and it just keeps on going. It's totally dysfunctional. Right. So those are not bringing the black cloud in, but it is a very, very dark cloud that's over many, many lives in our state. And it's really, really tragic.
As you mentioned, kind of, prior, there was that 2/3 requirement to pass a budget. And that kind of was a check and balance between the parties in negotiating these budgets. Since that's been gone, and being in the minority party, I guess, how are you able to, get things in the budget and kind of reach bipartisanship? Kind of, how are you guys working on that?
What works really well is legislator to legislator, colleague to colleague. And a lot of that is going on right now. I think that's why we saw the budget priorities that I just mentioned for small business and for our schools. Those are things that developed out of very, very important and serious discussions from both sides with each other. So that while we're the minority party, our ideas were certainly used in the compromise legislation. In fact, those ideas generated in the Republican caucus. And not to make this a partisan thing, it could have been certainly with the Democrat caucus, but the fact that they talked to one another, and the lead needed to be a Democrat author, that's okay. Back to what Governor Wilson said, it is not about whose name is on it, because, by the way, we were all co-authors, so all of our names are on it. It's that we did something really good at a time when something like this was really desperately needed. And I think that's where my colleagues, and I will say, if not all, 95%, 98% of them, when I approach them and explain my situation, they don't always give me an eye that I'm going to vote on it, but they give me reassurance that the direction I'm headed is a good one. It needs more work because there's too much opposition that they have to recognize. But if I keep working, they're walking with me and could change and help me. But I have to do a harder job, more work. And I think those are the things that lie under all of this, that it's really important for people to understand. We are people to people. We're humankind, if you will. And when you use that and relate to someone person to person, it makes a lot of difference. So let me bring up the Zooming that goes on. I think all of us are talking about how there is, well, we get to see your face, you get to see my expressions, we get to talk a lot about the things that make a difference, but there's something missing. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wonder if there is this thing, I have my space around me and you have your space around you, and there is some sort of electricity or some substance that's there that really connects you with the other person versus talking to a face on a screen.
Right.
So I am hoping June 15th, thank you, Governor. We're all looking forward to that when we can get back to that person to person, and we'll have people into the Capitol. Right now, when you are on the phone supporting or opposing a piece of legislation, I am sure that many of our people who have some strong feelings about support or oppose, they have a very short time to express themselves, and we are not seeing them because that's teleconferencing. So this year has been tough for all of us, whatever our political affiliation is, and I think that binds us together too, to give a little extra in everything we do to the other person.
Yeah, legislative committees are starting now and kind of going through the process. Kind of what are some of your priorities this year on the legislative front?
Legislative priorities. I've been very involved in sober living homes and residential treatment facilities. I belong to a task force that's looking at all the bills this year, but my lead bill has been what I call Brandon's Law. And it actually got out of committee. It requires it prohibits false advertising in terms of what a particular residential treatment facility is going to provide you. And it was introduced, and the name is Brandon's Law because a young man, this was back in 2017, if I'm remembering the date right, Brandon, a very accomplished young man, had a psychotic break, had to be hospitalized and then moved to a treatment facility. And when the parents did the research, they came up with one that said that he was going to get like top-notch treatment, specialists. They would be overseeing his medication, monitoring him, all of the things that you want to hear as a parent when you're or a loved one, or even a friend that has to go into something like that to address their problems, their mental health issues. And what happened to Brandon, he was placed in a unlicensed facility, basically a sober living home. Nobody in that facility had the qualifications to take care of him. And he basically, without his medication to help, him function, he committed suicide. Oh. And so the bill requires, and now an oversight by our Department of Health, Social Services for him investigating complaints and then actually introducing punishment on facilities that are investigated for false advertising and actually recruiting people with those problems into those facilities. That's a big one. I also have a bill on fentanyl. I keep carrying this every year, hoping that someone will pay attention and elevate the drug fentanyl to the same level of punishment for cocaine and heroin production and importation. Important to notice on this bill that it is not about what goes on with the street drug sales. It is about those who produce, manufacture, and import these huge quantities of this drug. And fentanyl is probably one of the most deadliest compounds in pharmaceuticals on the planet. 2 milligrams, which are like 2 grains of salt, can kill you. It shuts down your respiration. And it's being laced into popular opiates that young people and middle-aged people are using, and they are not aware that it is in the let's say the OxyContin they're taking. One individual got it on through the internet, and it was basically pure fentanyl. And his father went into his bedroom after later in the evening, and he had only taken half a pill is what left, and he had passed away within a couple hours. So fentanyl needs to be increased in terms of the penalties, because what's the deterrent? Right now, there isn't one. It's basically not in the same category as those other drugs. Therefore, the sentencing are short. But we do have an opposition here to sentence enhancements this to me is a little sideways of that because it just puts it in the category it ought to be with cocaine and heroin. And based on quantity that's imported, the penalty increases for every additional kilos that are there. And we're talking kilos. We're talking about that little white package of white powder that you get on the street. So these are two of my big ones. I have a coastal erosion bill that I've made a 2-year bill because Senator Atkins has a bill that will be looking at the whole climate change and sea rise along our coast. And you're probably familiar with the collapses that we've seen, especially in my district. I've had a beach area washed out in huge fall corrosion in Encinitas, Oceanside area that killed a whole family. Wow. So the coastal bluffs are significant, and sea rise and its impact on infrastructure is significant. So her bill is looking at it's funding about $100 million annually for local governments to start addressing these problems. So I'm hoping that my bill, which would allow homeowners to do some mitigation themselves, but also be responsible for sand replenishment, will have an opportunity to be involved in a stakeholder group. And that's a big one, certainly for the family that is not here anymore because they were picnicking on the beach, sat in the wrong place, and, we're smothered in the landfall.
Prop 19 passed this November, kind of dealing with, property tax changes. And I believe you have a bill, SB 668, kind of delaying that. Can you kind of explain the thought behind that bill?
Yeah, it hasn't been heard yet. And I get a little pushback because the realtors, the two components of the bill are very good. And that's how it was sold. People with being able to move your base property tax. Some counties were allowing that anyway. This makes it statewide. And it's very important for seniors who are downsizing but want to take their property tax base even to a smaller home. But now with the tax rate and the value of property is up, but they can transfer their base which is great. But what came upon me after the passage of that were calls from a lot of the trust attorneys. And people were not aware of the restriction to be able to just laterally transfer the ownership of their properties to their children without the properties being now assessed at market rate. For homes that go back many, many years that have been passed to family, that is a significant increase in property tax. In my district alone, probably the area along the coast of the Orange County coast and certainly San Diego, you're talking about property taxes that range from $10,000 low end to $20,000 and $30,000, and that's the current base on what is not the current value of those properties. They've gone from $1 million to $4 million. So let's say at $1 million, it's like a $10,000 or something in that range. $2 million, I think it's about $10,000 annual. It's going to $30,000. So the families will have to unload these properties unless they live in them. And that is very confusing to our Board of Equalization. And I believe one of the members of that board thought that my idea to delay the implementation so that there can be a clarity on all these subset problems. When you have 3 children, one inherits the property. What about the other 2? If you have 3 properties, you get 3 of those. So they move to your 3 properties and make that their home. Does that count? All of these questions have started to come out from the trust attorneys. And probably the bottom line here is that if a trust attorney tells you that you can do X, Y, and Z in 2021, you pass away, God forbid, maybe in 35, give you a long time there, but, and you didn't understand the law at that time, and you put that in your trust. Now, a trust attorney is liable for giving you information that no longer suits what you have in your trust. And that's what's happening, because these are old trusts that were developed or put together many years ago, and now they're having to be changed dramatically on who gets what piece of property. And they're basically in the target, because if they give the wrong information to their clients and it turns out that didn't work, they're subject to, certainly a claim that they were, it was malpractice. So they're very concerned along with their clients. And that's where I got a call about it. And I said, well, let me see if we can delay the implementation for another year so that Franchise Tax Board or Board of Equalization, all of those figure out some of those subsets. And I got a high five from them. But on the other side, the realtors, et cetera, are not real happy because they think I'm trying to undo the bill, and I'm not. People have spoken on that. I do know that the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association is looking at a potential repeal, and there's some inertia there now. There's some, kind of churning up as more and more people are discovering, wow, this can really affect my current trust. And I think it's a legitimate question and a legitimate concern that folks on both sides of the issue really have. So, right. We'll see where it goes. But there's a constitutional question. But I've had an analysis that says that based on a short-term delay, that would not basically change the core of the bill, that the proposition of the law that was passed on the ballot. So we'll see.
Yeah. The past few years have been very difficult for, Republican candidates running in the state. Kind of what do you think is the path for the Republican Party to make a comeback here in California?
What I've been successful at with both Republicans and Democrats supporting me is that I make it very personal. And I do believe that it is becoming the path that we make direct contact with our voters, not just walking up to Republican doors, walking up to neighborhood doors and talking about finding out what their issues are. What are your pledges? What do you tend to do if you're running for reelection? What have you done? You promised me X. Did you do that? And I've been in this a long time. I was first elected to elective office in 1987, and I've been doing it since that time. No pension, by the way. I just want you to know that. Right. I'm not a public employee pensioner, but I found that for a very difficult one race I walked 5,000 precincts myself and talked to people. I did coffees. I did about 110 coffees with people all day, every day. Not all day, I mean, every day for a number of hours a day, just sitting in people's living rooms and talking about why I'm in this business, what I really care about, and what I hope to do to ensure that we keep the quality of life we have and that we enhance it for our children. And that makes a big difference because all politics is local. And if we turned back to this being local issues and local representatives, and you combine that and the nation becomes our community. And I've made that kind of my, what I go out on. I believe the United States of America is our community, and we are linked together, and the quality of life is no different in Nebraska as it is in California. Different issues to get there, but it's about having an opportunity and leaving that for our children and our grandchildren.
Here at Sacktown Talks, we have the pleasure of working with Russ Lowry, and he's told us many great stories about working with you. Can you share with us one memorable Russ Lowry story?
This is the greatest one. Russ Lowry actually got one of my bills almost to the governor's desk without ever going through the committees. And he never revealed that they caught him in the last leg, but he never told me how he did it, except, come on, Russ, I know you got the bros behind you, didn't you? And he said, yeah, man. So he was a delight. And the other thing, Russell and I were geographically challenged. So he would drive me to motels and hotels because I didn't have a place and we would get lost all the time. So this one time we're headed out and he's driving, and then all of a sudden I feel his body kind of getting stiff. And I said, what's the matter, Russ? And he said, I don't know if I should tell you. And I said, why? He says, we're in the wrong part of town and I don't know how to get out because they're all one-way streets. And I said, oh, great. Well, all of a sudden, the sign showed which way we should turn. So he and I were really great companions on that issue. So he was marvelous. He had one of the best, outreach to people. And he was very compelling in his arguments for something and his advice of opposing things, but doing that respectfully. I think that was probably his hallmark. Very respectful, but very passionate. And lots of fun, lots of fun. we had good chuckles back then.
Definitely. Well, I know it's a busy time of year and it's committee season. Thanks for joining us. Is there anything else you want to say before you go?
Just thanks for the opportunity. And since you're good buddies with Russell, tell him I still care about him. I still love him. And I always tell my staff, nobody gets out of my reach. So I haven't had to reach out to him lately, but I probably will be there before I'm done with his job.
Definitely. We'll let him know. Well, thank you so much, Pat, for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.